Alors, عسلامة الناس الكل، عسلامة. Donc موجودين في الواسب Tunisia chapter, so YouTube live and c'est notre nouveau bien sûr workshop إن شاء الله مع بعضنا. So hello everyone. That was in Arabic. In English now. So hello everyone. So welcome to WASP Tunisia chapter events, the new one. So thank you very much for attendance, of course. And we have with us Antoine Carossio. Hello, Antoine. Aslema.
Hi, Niel. Nice to meet you. Hello, everyone.
So this will be of course in English, but also if you want in French. So if you have some questions, as always, you can ask, of course, your questions or post your comments in the chat room. So we will talk with Antoine, and thank you again, Antoine, for being with us and for joining our community. So we'll talk about API, of course, API security, but especially GraphQL vulnerabilities in the wilds. And you will present, of course, a hands-on workshop with the WASP Top 10 Insights. So thank you again, Antoine. Merci beaucoup d'être là. So I think the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Niel. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité. Hello, everyone. So indeed, today I'm going to introduce to the OWASP Tunisia chapter a research topic and a workshop about hacking and defending GraphQL application at scales. There will be hands-on workshop, OWASP Top 10 OWASP Top 10 considerations about GraphQL security. So on the agenda, I will start with the research part. So you will see here we scanned a lot of GraphQL API at scales. We will try to understand why is GraphQL vulnerable, how to pentest GraphQL application at scale, and what was the challenge in this research. And we will then introduce you the most common GraphQL vulnerabilities in the wild under the prism of the OWASP Top 10. Then this will be more about the workshop part. So the cool thing on the workshop part is that you will be able to directly interact with vulnerable GraphQL applications. Everything here is open source. So I will give a lot of insights about that, and you will be able to try it directly yourself at home. During the conference and even after, and that's the point of this conference. And then I think it will be of high interest to stay until the end of the workshop, because I will introduce you more about GraphQL security. So I will introduce you some very relevant security projects, both for white hats and pen testers on the one hand, but also on the other hand for developers who wants to build secure GraphQL applications. So very briefly, who I am, I'm Antoine Carossio. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Escape, expert in GraphQL security. I graduated in France from École Polytechnique and in the United States from UC Berkeley. I have a passion for open source. I'm the co-author of GraphQL Armor that will be part of this workshop and of this conference today. And also, I know that's a bit specific for people who love security, but I'm a huge fan of Apple. I worked there before. So this is just to let you know a little bit more about me. Very briefly, so what is Escape? We're an API security company. We help security teams to quickly discover and secure all the APIs at scales. We don't need traffic, and we have a very low time to value, and this is what makes the difference. We are working with deep technology, algorithmics, and AI, and we are hiring. So if you have any interest in working with us in the next month, feel free to contact us too for the most passionate of you. Okay, so at Escape, we used to publish reports twice a year. So in 2023, we had the state of public APIs. At the beginning of 2024, we worked in the API secrets sprawl. So I really encourage you to read those reports too. But today, most of the content I'm going to present, especially in the research part, will be about the state of GraphQL security 2024. You can directly access the whole content for this report directly on the QR code or the link you can see here. So what's in this report? In this report, actually, we present you how we scan 160 production GraphQL APIs. So those are really production-ready GraphQL APIs from real companies that we tested in depth at scale. Some of them are part of the Fortune 500 companies. Some of them are federated APIs with a lot of data in them. This took us almost 100 hours of cumulative scan hours to go in depth into the vulnerability testing. And this is almost 14,000 alerts that we actually found in those APIs during this scan period, and that I'm going to introduce you in this report. So almost 100 security issues per application, which is quite high, and try to understand why. So this is obviously my first. Oh, it seems like I've been cut out. Am I back? Sorry. Yeah. Niall, would you mind confirming me I'm back live, because it seems like I've been disconnected for a few seconds.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. So just a few seconds. So
yeah, just a few seconds. Okay, so let me go back to the previous slide. So exactly. I just wanted to emphasize here that GraphQL is taking more and more space in the API space in enterprise companies. GraphQL is actually today implemented at scale within all the Fortune 500 verticals, whether it is in finance, in gaming, in tech, in crypto, and so on. It is used in different ways. And this is really important to understand why is GraphQL vulnerable today. The thing is that GraphQL is a full feature language. So this is here an example of a GraphQL query. A GraphQL query, it has a certain depth and a certain width, which makes it very different from the standard REST APIs. A GraphQL query comes with a lot of different features: operation, fields, directives, some parameters. You can do aliases, batching queries, use fragments, and so on. And what is important here to understand is with great features come great responsibilities too. And here, most of those features also come with their own sets of potential vulnerabilities and weaknesses. The second thing is that GraphQL is actually a graph. It organizes your resources as a graph. So, for example, if somewhere in your graph you store a Stripe token in your database, actually the problem is that it can be accessed by different paths that are leading to the same resources, the same resource. So access control becomes extremely difficult to handle in that case. Obviously, if you want to make sure that a token is secure, you want to secure the access is secure. You must be sure that all path leading to this token is actually secure the proper way, including sometimes in loops or in very long path leading to the resource. The second thing that I would like to emphasize is how we manage to collect all of this data to pen test all of those APIs at scale in an automated manner. The thing is that classic automated testing cannot really assess the business logic of APIs. Obviously, if you just send a random request on a GraphQL API, there is a great chance that the request is actually blocked by the application validation layer, because the request just doesn't make sense according to what is accepted by the application and to the business logic of the API. So this is where we worked on a concept that is called feedback-driven API exploration. This is a concept, a research topic that has been explored by Microsoft first with on REST APIs with RESTler. And the goal here is to interact with the API and to progressively collect data on the API, trying to understand how it works and trying to re-inject the relevant data in the relevant request and to execute them in the right order. Here on your left, you can see what a classic vulnerability scanner would send. He would just send data that is maybe consistent to the type of the data. For example, if I take the email field here, we can see an hello world, that hello world has been sent in this field, just because actually it's an email that is typed as a string, so this doesn't make sense. While what we did in this research is that we really tried to have an algorithm that will re-inject real IDs that have been found in the database earlier. For example, here, if we want to edit a user, we must have found a user before or created a user before and re-inject a real ID that makes sense according to the database and the business logic of the API. In an email field, we will really try to send an email field. And here we can see in the password that we will attempt a dump injection here, but at least the data is consistent and coherent with the API. This is really the difficulty of testing GraphQL APIs. The second here bottleneck we had is that GraphQL is a graph again. So if we want to ensure the access control and test it properly and so on, we really want to test and recursively explore all paths in this graph to make sure we tested in depth the GraphQL application. So this is also a real difference with automatically testing a REST API with Burp Suite, for example, for those who are more on the pen testing side. On Burp Suite, you will literally iterate on all the routes of the API. Here, you want to understand the structure of the graph, try to explore the path in the right order, to explore them in depth, and attempt different scenarios in order to test all the possible all the combination possible in a relevant manner. Okay, so now what did we find? This is interesting to deep dive a little bit more into the vulnerabilities that have been exposed during this research. And we did that through the prism of the OWASP top 10 specification. Okay. So most of this data, I gave it to you earlier. What is interesting is that almost a third of the vulnerability we found are actually highly critical, and I will introduce them, most of them just after. But in a nutshell, most of the highly critical issue we actually found were about access control issue, which is really complicated in GraphQL. Okay, so here, if we take the OWASP top 10 specification, we can see that in GraphQL, you can basically we found a lot of vulnerabilities that are not all critical, but that were about unrestricted resource consumption. Of course, in GraphQL, as we saw earlier, you have queries that have a certain width, a certain depth, and therefore the requests, it can be easy to bypass the server limitations that are put in place using the GraphQL language and the different restrictions different rate limits that are put in place. And we see this over-representation of everything related to resource consumption here, according to the OWASP top 10. Okay. Just before deep diving into the GraphQL specific vulnerabilities, let's have a quick look about the classic API vulnerabilities. So here we are more talking about vulnerabilities that are also inside REST applications that we see a lot into GraphQL applications. The first one we find really often is about debug mode being still enabled, or on the GraphQL layer, or more underneath. It's about potential stack traces that are forwarded to the GraphQL APIs and then by the GraphQL API to the customer. Indeed, it happens a lot that a GraphQL API actually serves as a federation layer, which means basically kind of a proxy in front of REST APIs. REST APIs that can be internal, okay? Those REST APIs, since they are internal, they are considered as secure. Debug mode is not even disabled on those REST APIs, but what happens is that you just call the GraphQL API. The GraphQL API then calls a REST API. The REST API that is supposed to be internal and badly secured actually responds with a certain stack trace, and this stack trace is forwarded to the GraphQL API and then exposed to the end user. So here, this is a very simple example that we have here. We can see that a certain Apollo Gateway module, I mean, the Apollo Gateway module with a specific version is exposed. And it happened that if you go and look into a database, there is a high vulnerability inside this specific dependency. And so this helps a lot here into a hacker, with a hacker mindset, into your hacker track towards a privilege escalation and so on. You can here deep dive and investigate this new information that you're giving to the user. Access control issues, so I discussed a lot about them, but it happens that actually, if you think about it, the mutations in GraphQL, so mutations in GraphQL are the operations, the requests that will actually mutate, potentially change the data that is stored in the database. It happens that most of the routes most of the mutations are not supposed to be accessible without authentication. And we saw that in fact, there are a lot of mutations. So set aside the registration mutations and so on that are obviously unauthenticated. We saw a lot of potential issues here with mutations that are exposed publicly on the internet without any authentication or authorization mechanism. So here it's about updating a payment, and this is a real positive on an API we found. Almost 10% of endpoints were misconfigured with that, and actually this is huge because it means that critical feature of APIs were just publicly accessible on the internet without any tokens, which is a real nightmare. Injections, of course, are still there. So here it's all about some very simple injections that we took an example. Most of those injections, they come from badly handled inputs, and also inputs that are forwarded to REST APIs behind them that are most of the time internal, and so they are not taken care of, which explains that injections are still a problem today in GraphQL applications. Let's now focus on the GraphQL specific vulnerabilities. Okay, so we are going to cover here denial of service and resource consumption, brute forcing, so which are closely related, in fact, in GraphQL, API schema leaking, and unsafe public operations. So here, we saw in the first slides that GraphQL is a full-featured language. One of the features is fragments. Okay, so fragments is like basically a function. Let's make it very simple for explaining. But what happens is if a fragment calls itself. Obviously, like a function calls itself, potentially it can create infinite recursions. It's actually the same with GraphQL, and this is most common than when we think. Here, you can imagine that it can turn out into bombs. I will focus on that a little bit later, but it calls itself an infinite amount of time, and this is a really interesting vulnerability that we found multiple times in really famous GraphQL APIs. I mean, GraphQL APIs of really famous companies. We can see that the infinite recursion, it just monopolizes the whole resource of a certain pod, a certain server, and it just crashes, it ends up crashing the GraphQL API. So even worse with file upload, GraphQL bombs. So here, what happens? That's by building properly your upload. So what's important to understand here is that GraphQL has not been built to upload files, but some people, they really try to tweak GraphQL in order to allow uploads through GraphQL. And what happens here is that by building your payload properly, you can really create what we call a GraphQL bomb. We wrote a full article about that on our blog, so feel free to look for GraphQL bomb on Google for more details. And here you have obviously the ability to upload a picture an infinite amount of time, for example, using aliasing. And here it creates requests that was supposed to be small originally, only maybe 2 megabytes, that end up being 1 gigabyte, and the data should be processed by the server, and the server crashes, hard crashes violently. And so this is a very, very fun attack here with GraphQL bombs when there are GraphQL uploads, file uploads that are enabled. So quick advice here, try to avoid uploading files through GraphQL and use more classic ways. So obviously this leads to API denial of service and API unavailability, even on very famous APIs again. Okay, so the top two is about brute forcing API requests and trying to circumvent the rate limit, the rate limitations that are put in place. So with Escape, with GraphQL, you can send multiple GraphQL queries in one HTTP request, either separately but in one request. This is called batching. Not all of GraphQL servers support that technology. However, aliasing is part of the official GraphQL specification, and so all GraphQL servers, whatever the framework, the underlying framework is, should support it. And the problem here is that brute forcing can be used to bypass rate limiting that is put in place at the server level, such as rate limiting on logging mutations, and then implement a brute force attack. Also, this is a pretty common vulnerability here. What the server sees is only one request, but what the GraphQL layer sees is a huge number of attempts to log in. So we should really implement the rate limiting not only on the server side, but only on the GraphQL side. So this, of course, can end up in stolen account, sensitive data exfiltration, and denial of service again. Okay. One other thing that is interesting, that is worth commenting upon, is about clicking the schema. So we will deep dive a little bit more on this during the workshop. But the thing that in GraphQL, you can see all the schema behind the of the GraphQL API using the introspection feature. This is extremely useful for development purposes. It is generally advised, it depends, to disable introspection in production. In any case, there are some people that think it's a good idea and that really do that. They just disable introspection in production. But the thing is that GraphQL also comes with another feature that is called field suggestion. And field suggestion, it's about, for example, sending a query that would be user, but with an E at the end, be user-E. Or here, it's create session with only one single S. And here, the field suggestion will tell you, hey, did you mean create session with 2S, create user, create file, or create image? So here it's about unveiling the schema in an unofficial way. You think you already made your schema unavailable, but the truth is that your schema can still be rebuilt using field suggestion. So you also have to disable field suggestion in that case. So this is very specific to GraphQL and very common again. So here, let's take a moment to talk about Clairvoyance. So Clairvoyance is an open source tool that is built for that. It's all about building back a schema using the GraphQL field suggestion feature while the introspection is disabled. This is a really cool open source project that I contributed a lot to this project, and I really enjoy playing with it. Of course, here it can give access to unauthorized functions, because some people think because a certain field is not documented, then it is protected. So it's about obfuscating the schema. That's a bad idea, because you might still be able to find it, obviously, using field suggestion or other ways, and so on the compromission of the API. A small word about the sensitive data exposure. We found a lot of secrets, passwords, even credit card numbers, and access token exposed through the GraphQL APIs, mainly because of what we discussed earlier, the different paths leading to the same resource in GraphQL. So this is also something that we should take into account. I won't deep dive into the detail. I have another report that is dedicated to API secret sprawl in general, so not only on GraphQL applications. And I really encourage you to take a look at it too. If this is something of interest for you. Okay, so a conclusion about the research I just introduced. A third of the vulnerabilities, of the GraphQL API we tested had highly critical GraphQL vulnerabilities, and 2/3 of them were vulnerable to medium-level issues. So that's actually quite a lot. We can see that denial of service is a major problem and a single point of failure, especially when using federated GraphQL APIs. So federation is what we discussed also earlier, is about stitching multiple APIs into one big API, whether they are GraphQL or REST API, but all of this supported by an overlay of GraphQL API. And what is even more interesting here is that most of those issues are actually solvable by simply implementing some best practices about authorization, authentication, input validation, and rate limiting. And this is what is covered in the following workshop. Okay, so actually the workshop I'm going to present today, I'm not going to deep dive into the workshop myself. It's everything open source. I just want to give hints for people to get interested into that topic, to play themselves with that topic. I'm just going to show you a free example. And at the same time, I'm also going to introduce you GraphQL Armor, which is a fully open source project. So the workshop is both for pen testers who want to improve their skills and their understanding of GraphQL APIs, but also for developers who want to build more secure GraphQL applications. Okay, so about the workshop. The workshop here, the goal is to install and play with the vulnerable application that we actually built originally for the DEF CON last summer. There are multiple ways here. Either using, if you have Docker and Docker Compose, you can then clone and start the playground directly locally, and so you can see the whole code behind it. Or if you don't wanna, I mean, if you wanna play right now with this, you can simply go to the link here and have fun with the playground. And I'm going to do it just with a few examples today. So the first one will be about introspection, because I want to introduce another very cool open source tool that is called GraphQL Voyager at the same time. So, okay, so here, let me go to the API. So here we can see this is the GitHub repository of the playground. It gives some of the queries, I mean, it gives the queries that we want to play with in the file queries.yml. One of it is the introspection. Okay, so here, let's run the introspection on our GraphQL API. So here I'm just on the link I provided before, but you can also run that locally and tweak it as you wish. Let's go. So I'm running the introspection query right now. Just putting some more
Could
on my screen.
we zoom a little bit?
I'm going to zoom a little. All right. Yeah. Does it feel better?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so here, this is the introspection query we discussed a bit earlier. And here, this is the schema of the GraphQL API. So here, we are really in the 101 pen testing GraphQL, but you will, I think you can be really astonished by the number of GraphQL APIs that are actually exposing their schema publicly. And it is so convenient for developers at the same time that we can understand that choice. This is a choice. Here, what is interesting is what do we do with this schema? I really encourage everyone to use GraphQL Voyager. So it's graphqlkit.com. I'm going to try to zoom in. Okay, I can really zoom in, but using GraphQL Voyager, you can simply explore the schema. So here, the schema is really done. I'm copy pasting it here. Here it is. So this is here the playground we built, which is extremely simple. But what matters here is we can see that we have some queries that have following and preceding numbers. And hence, this creates some loops. And this is where it's interesting because if we take a look at the other potential queries we have here, I'm going to just take one more. It's the max depth query. And we see that you can do following, preceding, etc., etc. And here you can see that you can abuse of the GraphQL feature. Here it is to build, I think, a query that requires a lot of, potentially, that could require a lot of computation resources. While actually we are not doing that much here. We're just calling the following, the preceding, and so on in a simple API. This is about resource consumption. We are abusing the loop of the GraphQL application. And this is why it's a very good common practice to put a maximum depth limit into a GraphQL API. Using GraphQL Armor, so GraphQL Armor, which is another open source tool that we maintain at Escape, we can implement all of those best practices in a very simple manner by default on GraphQL, TypeScript GraphQL implementations, Yoga and Apollo, so the most used one. Apollo Server and GraphQL Yoga. And you can see here, so this is a second sandbox that we have here, which is the secure version of the GraphQL application. And here you can see that instead of the of having an answer, to the request here that is 6, we actually have an error that is said that says syntax error. The query depth limit is 6. We found 10 here, so we block the request. So here, the max depth, just one example. I truly encourage you all to explore other issues such as the stack trace. We talked about the stack trace, the field suggestion feature that is enabled and disabled, the max aliases feature, same for directives, for batch query. And even better than that, since all of this is fully open source, feel free to contribute to the application and add your own use case. GraphQL Armor is also open source. It's really easy to add more modules and components to GraphQL Armor in order to make it even more useful for developers. So whether you're a developer or a pen tester, you can use both projects in parallel to test that your module is working on GraphQL Armor and to understand how it works in the GraphQL implementation. All right, so let me get back to the slide quickly. So we discussed a bit about all of this. Those are just slides about what I just discussed. We can see that installing GraphQL Armor is pretty straightforward. It's just about yarn add or an npm install. It's already used in production by the Guild and the Hive, who developed Yoga. It's used in production by Neo4j at scale. We're using GraphQL Armor at scale. ArangoDB, Redwood.js, Tick.io, all of those giant actors of the GraphQL ecosystem. Today, they trust GraphQL Armor for implementing those best practices. So we love this project, and we'll love to see more issues open, contributions on the projects, and it will be a pleasure to discuss with you about that. Okay, won't enter into all of the details. These are actually the modules and features we support currently in GraphQL Armor. So feel free to go on our GitHub page and interact with GraphQL Armor. All right. This is my last part. I just wanted to introduce some more cool open source stuff about GraphQL and open source security. The first thing is a fingerprinting tool. The goal here is that you feed the domain name to this tool. So it's called Goctopus. We built it internally at Escape 2. You just feed it with a domain name, and it discovers all the GraphQL APIs exposed on the domain name. I mean, it's at least its goal. Again, fully open source, written in Go, super efficient. It only requires a few seconds to give you the list of the GraphQL APIs, maybe a bit more for very large domain names. It's very useful for pen testers as a recognition tool. All right, the second one, I won't enter into the details of Goctopus. Word list. Okay, so we've been asked a lot. We scanned a lot of GraphQL APIs at Escape. And so we collected a lot of introspections, actually more than 60K introspections. And from those introspection files, and the schema files, we managed to build very relevant word lists that can be used in Burp Suite, for example, to attempt brute force field suggestions, enumeration with clairvoyance, as we discussed earlier, and so on. Those word lists, they are really well built. They make a distinction between the mutations, the queries, the arguments, and so on in GraphQL. So enjoy, play with the word lists. Don't hesitate to use them in your own open source project and in your work daily. This project is quite popular on GitHub, and we have a lot of people that enjoy using it on a daily basis. It's very simple, just word lists. Clairvoyance, we already discussed about it. It's all about rebuilding the schema from the field suggestion feature when the introspection is disabled. We really encourage you to take a look at Escape also if you wanna play with advanced features. Okay, I have one more thing to show you before this presentation ends. This is a really cool stuff too, also open source, that we developed internally at Escape and that is freely available online. It's called GraphQL Academy, sorry. And we can go briefly on the GraphQL Academy. So it's actually, this is extremely cool because it allows you, whether again you are a pen tester or a developer, to truly understand how GraphQL works. But what's fun here is that you have nothing to install. We install the full environment directly inside your web browser. So you can just follow the lessons. So there are 9 currently and more to come. According to the OWASP API 2023 edition, and you can directly try within the environment that is integrated inside the application and follow the tutorial. So you see you have the full editor here and you can play with it. And so what is fun here is that it's useful not only for developers, but also for pen testers. It's important to have the two visions and to see both sides at the same time, whether you want to attack or to defend and create secure applications. Okay, so this has already been quite long. So again, I'm Antoine Carossio. I'm really available to answer your questions right now, but also later. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn to download our reports and specifically this report. If you have any question, I remain available for the rest of the hour. And it's been a pleasure to introduce that to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for your great presentation. So, of course, about GraphQL, also vulnerabilities and matching with OWASP, of course, top 10, and many, of course, open source projects on this area, even in security and best practice and pen testing, etc. So I think it's very interesting. It's like quite different between this type of graph, how do you say, graph manner to request or to query generally, and with many, of course, concepts specific for graphs. So I think for paths, for denial of service, there are some specific, as you said, security issues for in this type of area. So I think research is very important on this topic. I sent already to the audience if there are some questions. So we are waiting for questions or comments. If you have, don't hesitate. This is, I think, a new area. That's why it's very so specific. So if you have any questions, we are ready to receive your comments on the chat room. Antoine, encore avec nous? Je crois qu'il y a un problème de connexion. Non, c'est ça? Je crois qu'il y a un problème de connexion. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? You hear me or? Okay.
I'm truly sorry, I've been cut out again.
Welcome back.
It's like the internet. I mean, people are working next to me, and it seems like they are abusing of the internet connection a little.
No, it's okay, I think. So we are waiting for questions or some comments. So we are just waiting 1 minute or 2 minutes for that. So
of course.
Okay, so I asked the question if they hear me. So the answer is yes. So okay, I thought that the connection is missed. So don't hesitate, please. So if you have, meanwhile, if you have, Antoine, some other things to add, or some future directions in research in this area, or some other projects about API security to share, or something like that, so feel free. Est-ce que tu m'entends, Antoine, ou c'est bon?
Oui,
C'est bon?
moi, oui.
D'accord. En fait, est-ce que tu as d'autres projets futurs concernant ce volet, ou peut-être sur la sécurité des API ou something like that?
Alors oui, effectivement, nous, on ne travaille pas que sur la sécurité des API GraphQL, même si on a un gros angle sur la sécurité des applications GraphQL. Là, c'est vrai qu'on a aussi présenté tout ce qui était un petit peu les API en profondeur. Il y a un enjeu aujourd'hui dont on se rend compte au sein des entreprises, c'est assez drôle, mais les personnes de la sécurité ont en fait beaucoup de mal à suivre ce que les développeurs exposent. Ils savent même pas, avant de se dire, OK, est-ce que nos API ont des vulnérabilités, ils se disent, en fait, quelles sont mes API? Donc, on travaille beaucoup là-dessus aussi. C'est un petit peu ce que je montrais dans la présentation au travers de GoCtopus.
D'accord.
GoCtopus, c'est un sujet, là, c'est open source et ça permet de découvrir les API GraphQL à l'échelle. Mais voilà, on fait la même chose aussi pour les API REST, les API gRPC, etc.
D'accord. C'est plus la sensibilisation, en fait.
Oui, c'est de la discovery. Alors, en fait, c'est drôle parce que tous les sujets sur lesquels on travaille sont à la fois très utiles pour des développeurs ou des application security engineers, mais aussi de l'autre côté pour des gens qui cherchent à défendre, enfin, à créer quelque chose de sécurisé au sein de leur entreprise et s'assurer que leur entreprise est sécurisée, mais aussi de l'autre côté, c'est très utile. C'est des outils qui sont très utiles pour les pentesters. J'ai moi-même été pentester il y a quelques années. Et effectivement, tous les outils qu'on crée, ça peut s'apparenter à des outils de recognition, de pentest automatisé, etc.
D'accord. Donc, en fait, c'est une culture, en fait, qui est en train de se développer encore. Donc, voilà, c'est clair.
Absolument.
Donc, voilà, dernier appel, si vous avez des questions. Ben, on attend quelques secondes. En fait, il y a un petit décalage toujours, en fait, entre le live et les commentaires. Donc, c'est pour ça que parfois, on attend un petit peu, peut-être, s'il y a des questions. All is clear. No questions, no more. OK. So, je te remercie. So, thank you very much, Antoine, for your contribution, for all your insights, and all the links you share, the knowledge you share. So, thank you very much, and hope you enjoy this.
Oui, bien sûr. C'est toujours, it's always a bit different when it's not in person, but it was a pleasure presenting the conference to OWASP Tunisia in front of the audience, and thank you very much for organizing.
Yeah, and next time in Tunisia.
Okay. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. You choose the city, and let's go.
Thank you, Niel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Donc, merci beaucoup. يعطيكم الصحة. Donc, اللي في الcommunauté في تونس مرحبا بكم. Donc, si vous avez aussi des propositions, merci encore Antoine et merci à toute l'audience. So, thank you very much, and see you next event, inshallah.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.